All right. So just make sure everyone can hear me loud and clear. There is a little chat box over there. So do drop in your comment, anything. If you have any audio issue, do drop a comment over there. And I'm pretty sure we can all see there. And we'll try to address those technical issues as soon as we can. Okay. So if you can hear us loud and clear, do give us a thumbs up. Swap, I'll try to unmute yourself as well. I'm not sure if I can. Maybe, I'm not sure. Should I unmute you or yeah, just go ahead and shout.
Yeah.
Oh, lovely,
Hope
lovely,
everyone can hear me.
lovely. Great.
Awesome.
So we can start the session. Maybe I just give maybe another 2 minutes to get everyone to join it. And meanwhile, I will switch into the slide over here. So whoever already online, just bear with us for another 2 minutes and just wait for the other people to join in. We are now in the Asian time zone, so normally it's a kind of a courtesy to join slightly late. Yeah. Cool. And meanwhile, we'll be very happy to take over the session from previous hour. I'm not sure if any one of you in the chat or in the call has just got off from our lovely session from Kuala Lumpur and on Wang motion design, and I think it was presented by Yamin, and he's a very close friend of ours as well, and in Friends with Figma community in Singapore. Yeah, so let me introduce myself a little bit. My name is Steve, and I am currently a designer from OCBC Bank. So it's Overseas Chinese Banking Corporation in Singapore. It's one of the 3 banks here. I am working mostly on design systems, and I would love to talk about design system for days and night, but we have a little surprise for you at the end of this session, so do stay tuned for that. Yeah, so I was also running Friends of Figma community here in Singapore for the past 2 years, I guess, probably 2.5 years. Yeah, and we probably maybe you guys didn't know that Friends of Figma Singapore is actually one of the second largest community in the world. From we're talking about the Friends of Figma chapters here. I think the first one is Barcelona, the second one is here. Even though Singapore being a very small dot on the map, we have a pretty big designer community here. And so for those who die in the cold from Europe, from America, or the other part of the world, if you haven't been to Singapore before, do drop by here. Maybe some of you has been visit Singapore before, or just as a transit over here. But do drop by if you're planning to move over here, even just for vacation or working here or study here. Do reach out to us, and we'll be very happy to welcome you as a big community here. Okay, and that's a little bit more about myself, and I will be moving to the next slide here. Let me talk a little bit about Word Tool, Friends of Figma Word Tool 2025. This is actually our first time to have this kind of event worldwide. It's a global event. It's 24 hours non-stop event. It was enabled only by a global collaboration from all the different chapters, leaders around the world. We started this planning probably months ago. I think the idea was starting from last year, just in November or December, and we planned all the event a few months back. And it's as you can see, it's a virtual celebrations of all the communities around the whole world. And we want to see how designers from different parts of the world behave differently, think differently, talk in different scenes, or share their different interests. And we think this diversity and richness for the global community is actually what has been driven us keep going on for years and years in the past. And locally, we are this whole event was actually designed to spotlight all the unique voices from each local chapters. That's why we specifically choose an array of different designers and speakers to talk about every little details in the design world, from design system to service design, to visual design, to product design, to holistic design experience, everything that's unique to a local or to the global sense. Yeah. And So today, you can see we have Swapnil in the call, and Swapnil is he used to be a designer in last time you were in Singapore Airlines, but now he's studying in the Glasgow School of Art, and he's finishing his master degree over there, Master of Design. And today he will be very happy to share with you guys beyond user experience design. He's gonna tell you all about service design with a few things he has learned for the past years. So without further ado, I will be passing the screen share to Swap, and Swap, feel free to take over.
Thank you. Let me just give me 2 seconds while I share my screen. Steve, you might want to stop so that I can take over. It's not
Stop
letting
my
me.
sharing. Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Perfect. I think everyone can see this, right?
Yes.
Awesome. So, hi everyone. I'm Swapnil. I'm currently doing my master's. I'm also a product designer, or you can call it a UX designer. There's just so many terms. I've lost track of, what's even going on in this world anymore. But, I'm just gonna go through a bit about myself. I was a UX strategist at Singapore Airlines. I've also done work with Dell as a UX engineer, and I've worked in a lot of industries like startups and banks, and even done projects for different companies as well. And if you guys didn't know already, I'm also the Friends of Figma Glasgow leader. So unfortunately, Glasgow is not participating in the World Tour this year, but because I am from Singapore, I will be representing Singapore today. Um, but if you guys are ever in Glasgow, do check out Friends of Figma Glasgow. Just head over to our page and give us a like, give us a follow, and you can always join us for our events. So a bit about my background. I'm currently finishing up my Master of Design, and before that, I was in NTU in Singapore. I did my Bachelor of Engineering, so I guess that kind of comes in handy in a way, knowing how to code and design at the same time. So now moving on to the main part of what I'm about to say. I'm gonna try my best to not keep it very dry and not keep it very boring. And I'm going to make sure it's not too long as well, because I understand, a lot of you guys are, this is your post work, you want to go back home if you're in Singapore. If you're in the European time zone, you guys probably want to have lunch soon. So, I respect that. And so what is service design, right? I think a lot of people don't know what the term service design is. Like some of the reactions that they just have in their brain are like, like this or like this meme, and they're just like, so what is that? A lot of people, they get confused as to how do you design a service. They know how to design products, but what do you mean service design? So essentially, if you look at the past, few years of the design industry, the past few decades, we have spent them perfecting the science of pixels and personas and trying to craft interfaces and that feel intuitive so that they feel like second nature. But in our quest to really optimize things like click-through rates and A/B testings, we're trying to use that as a measure for success, and we've lost sight of something that is very fundamental, which is that the human stories that numbers can't capture. So today, what I really want to talk about is why the future of design isn't just on screens, but it is in the spaces that are in between them. So let's start with the hard truth. A lot of times, a lot of companies, this is what it looks like when you are a designer. You have a high customer satisfaction score, and they're like, "Yay, good job, designers!" Right? But unfortunately, behind the scenes, that is not what the users actually resonate with. Just because your company has a high satisfaction score, a great Glassdoor rating, a great user rating, that doesn't mean that the users actually are happy with you, or the users trust you, or the fact that you haven't even included the users that you should be including in the first place. And so, the truth is that numbers lie. And essentially, they lie because they reduce that messy, emotional, and irrational beauty of a human experience that exists into things like a tidy bar graph, into things like, ratings like out of 5, out of 10, 4.5 stars and so on. And I think that just, reduces that human touch and human connection that exists with design. And so, I want you to think of it this way. Imagine you have two coffee shops right next to each other. You're walking down the road. They're almost the exact same coffee shop, and they sell coffees at the same price. But what service design is what actually makes you walk into one and not the other. And then you keep going back to the one that you like, and you tell your friends about it, and the friends come and visit that coffee shop, and the other coffee shop continues to, be the unpopular one. The sole reason is service design. And it's funny because service design is not concept that only, is applied to digital world, but also to the real world. And so the single act of vulnerability, quantitative, qualitative, unmeasurable, and it is profoundly human, right? And that essentially becomes the blueprint for your customers or your users. And so this essentially is the difference of service design when you compare it to a profession like UX design. As service designers, we are not just solving for problems, but we're designing for the meaning in between. So today I'll be sharing three key service design tools that service designers use to get more out of a situation, and how those of you in the UX field actually miss out on currently, but can implement in your research or your design processes to really get the most out of the meaning of your design. So the first item in the toolkit is ecosystem mapping. Now, service designers, they look at different parts of a user's life, how they connect with each other, and even the parts that seem completely unrelated. So maybe today I want you to think of, how you spend your morning as an example, right? Some of you maybe woke up, showered, went out for a walk, went to get coffee, went for work, whatever it is. And, I want you to think about, how would you map this journey to, let's say, your workplace? Maybe I'm sure a lot of you guys woke up, got changed, took the public transport or car and went to work. So from the journey of waking up to your, going to the workplace, how are you going to map it? Because everyone's going to map it very differently. Some people, maybe they'll draw illustrations that link to each other. Some people will make it very systematic and orderly. Some people will straight up go and do, charts with those squares and diagonals and triangles and stuff. And, that's the beauty of it, though. Like, everyone has a different way of mapping their journeys. And so when you think of how you are going to map your journey, did you ever think of asking yourself, does it communicate what you're actually trying to communicate? What did you capture in that map of yours? And can you make it make sense? You know, and so essentially, mapping serves as a very, very powerful tool for understanding complex data. It allows us to visualize relationships and patterns that might otherwise go unnoticed. And this approach essentially enhances your decision-making process and insights when you are doing your design process, no matter what kind of designer you are. And so mapping is not something that's new. It has existed for thousands of years. In the past, the human body has been mapped. The entire universe has been mapped as well. You have maps of your MRT or train stations. You have maps that show you landmarks. And now even memes have taken over maps. And so maps essentially serve as very powerful tools to enhance our understanding of different phenomena. They allow us to transition from simply mapping some physical features or resources to then ask ourselves, can we explore complex socio-technical interactions with mapping? This essentially starts to shift in focus, and we can provide deeper insights into the dynamics of anything. And understanding these complexities can then lead us to making more informed decisions. And your decision making and planning just gets better when you use mapping in your user design projects. So let's take a look at this map, right? Let's say you're a service designer who's focused on designing for personal insurance and banks. So this is a project that I personally worked on before, and there are moments where understanding human bias, outlook, perception, and even personal interaction are very critical to the user experience, and not just doing a competitor analysis or feature benchmarking that we so easily always get to first thing when we're trying to do our research. So this ecosystem map is, shows the different kind of stakeholders within the UK that have an impact on each other. And if you zoom in, you'll be able to see that everyone has an impact on each other, be it direct or indirect. There's severe need to understand how power flows from one actor to another, how institutional authority flows from one actor to another, how funding flows from one actor to another. And so you end up realizing how crazy it is that someone who wants to buy insurance has a direct impact or indirect impact on things like low-income families, government agencies, data providers, or AI experts. And this person itself in the center of this map isn't the one thinking about it, but you as a service designer or as a UX designer has the responsibility to do so. And so because of that, you're able to then engage more meaningfully with that core user group that exists. And so, by understanding how you engage with that user in a meaningful way, you can also then overlay connections, revealing hidden ones that then help you further in noticing the unnoticed and considering things that are out of the ordinary. So this project particularly, this really helped me uncover insights that typical UX tools would have never been able to help me to do so. One of the main issues that I realized was that the design of the insurance or the platform was not the problem, but rather a systemic issue that led to a cultural trust gap. And this was just one issue that was uncovered. And if you think about it, there is no way, if I didn't employ mapping and overlay further complexities within this map, I would never have found out that the issue is about cultural trust gap with communities that exist who don't buy insurance, right? And if not, I would have gone straight to, oh, maybe there's an accessibility issue. Oh, maybe there is, I need to work on the design, the UI of the platform. Maybe that's why people don't like it. Maybe the UX writing is bad, but essentially problems can be deeper than some of the most surface level solutions that we think of. And so the process of mapping, hence, is just as important as the map itself that you create. And this leads us to the second tool that service designers use and that UX designers definitely need to learn from, and it's called engagements. Now, engagements are moments when you step out from behind your screen and you try to look into the real world, into living rooms, look at branch lobbies in hotels, look at kitchen tables or, restaurants where people actually are engaging, with their experiences and actually living their life. This is definitely not a survey link that you sent, or a focus group briefing that you hold, or just a one-on-one talk with your user that you have, which a lot of UX researchers or designers tend to do. This is a conversation over coffee, right? It's maybe with a customer who just filed an insurance claim at 8 a.m. She's very bleary-eyed and she's like clutching her son's birth certificate. These are like the vulnerable moments that you need to be able to capture in order to co-create with these people instead of just consulting them for information. So in the same insurance project that I was working on, I turned a very bland workshop room into a living lab. So essentially an engagement that aims to connect authentically with your users and not in a transactional way where they just simply provide you the information based on the questions you ask. So what I did was to invite real users that fit the criteria I had defined. And they were, it was very difficult because they were from highly vulnerable backgrounds. And that makes engagements challenging because you need to add a level of sensitivity to the kind of questions that you ask them. So here's what I did. I created an activity called the algorithmic kitchen, right? It's a little game. And this physical engagement, consists of a deck of cards that are made up of different ingredients. So, you have different ingredients, as you can see, one of them is, all decision making visible to customers. Maybe that's something that, you know, these customers potentially value. And so essentially by giving them these ingredients, what I did was to ask them to Select those that matter the most to you and place them on a chopping board. After that, pick cooking methods. So cooking methods were, things like, combining different types of insurance protections into maybe a seamless package. That's an example of a cooking method card that I had created. And there are various others created based on the initial desk research and secondary research that I had conducted with them. And so what they did was to pick these ingredients, pick these cooking methods, and essentially form a recipe. And then they took turns sharing with each other and with me these completed recipes. And so what this session did was more than surface their personal preferences. It quietly shifted the power from the researcher to the participant. And that is the most important thing for any engagement. So let me introduce you to a framework. It's called the Einstein's Ladder of Participation. It's a very, very powerful framework that illustrates different levels of user involvement in a decision-making process. Each step really reveals how much real power we actually hand over as designers to the users. So at the very bottom, we have manipulation and therapy, where participation is very tokenistic, it's very superficial. And moving up, we reach consultation and application, where users are asked for feedback, but they don't really have a lot of influence in the decisions that happen after that. And now here's the kicker. Most of the day-to-day UX practices, they stall on the middle rungs, which are informing and consulting, because we rely on, surveys, heat maps, A/B tests, and these only scratch the surface of people's lived realities. These methods might nudge a button sometimes, but they rarely shift the balance of power to really capture that messy emotion of the user that really drive true loyalty of a user towards a brand or towards a platform. So the service design as a concept, as a practice, pushes us high up the ladder by asking questions like, where and how can we partner with these users or even let them drive? So at the very top, you can see that we have partnership, delegated power, and citizen control, where users are genuinely the co-creators and decision makers. In our work, especially when we're designing services or platforms or products that truly matter, the goal isn't just to inform or consult, it's to really aim for a partnership and, where possible, delegated power for the user. And so that means you have to co-create your solutions with your users instead of just usability testing the design or letting users decide which metrics really matter before we actually build the product as designers. Because real impact comes from users who are not just respondents, but actually partners in the process. So the invitation, today, tonight, today morning, wherever you are, is to keep it really simple. Keep your wireframes, that's all good, but pair them with participation methods that climb beyond tokenism. Workshops that hand over decisions to the users and the community that you're interacting with. Community pilot programs where users set the roadmap and not you showing the roadmap that you have set for them. And even things like feedback loops that actually outlive a sprint. Because when we graduate from, counting clicks to sharing control, we essentially stop designing for users and start designing with the citizens. And that is really where the real impact really lies. And that's very important because that's how you're going to get the change that your product, your platform really needs, that the user wants to see. Because if not, you're going to end up with the same complaints and the same feeling that the user is left with, which is a feeling of not being able to be vulnerable and not being able to really, verbalize what the issue they have is, but effective engagements in a way help to bring out the the thoughts that users can't turn into words. Now, my example of the activity that I did was just, it's just an example of how effective engagement can really help uncover things that your typical UX toolkit doesn't really offer. But there are many more ways to engage. You can engage with a place. Like, look at this Monopoly game, for example. Imagine turning that into an activity where users be more vulnerable, forget that they're in a state of, a user testing, and instead have fun, and you derive emotions at a much higher level than you normally would have. Or you can engage by doing something, you can learn by doing something, and by doing that, you can learn more about the problem itself. And by doing that, you end up learning more about improvements for what the problem is. And so essentially, what you're doing is you're making it more interesting for yourself and the user. And you use object as an information and not as a design. You need to ask yourself, what does this really tell me and what does it not tell me? You can engage by creating, simply go to a place with the relevant people, create with them, be them, and explore speculative ideas. Ask questions like, what if we do this? What if we do that? And these speculative questions can be the wildest things ever. You can ask things that don't really make sense sometimes, or things that are very impractical, and you know it will be very hard to turn into a reality. But that's fine. That's the whole point of it, because then what you're doing is you're challenging assumptions and notions that have been set by the society, and you are trying to see who benefits and who's excluded. And through that one speculative question, you've got so much data that you can work with. You can also engage by layering. So this brings you a lot closer to ecosystem maps that we just talked about, where layer on top of each other to understand the different intricacies and depth of your issue and your connections with your users that you're talking to, your stakeholders that you're talking to. And I think this, will really help bring that, surface the problem that actually is the issue. And so, all in all, you need to know why you need to engage. It's not just about doing that engagement for the sake of it, but asking yourself very important questions like, are you being inclusive? Do you know who should be included and who's being excluded from your engagement? Do you know what kind of demographic or democratic impact this can have on your users? You need to know what kind of questions you actually need answered. So you need to have done your research beforehand and be prepared to know that you are going in with the goal of having these questions answered. You need to know, who are the people who will have the valuable insight that will bring out the depth of this engagement, the ones with the expertise. And you need to know what is not known. You need to keep scrutinizing things. You need to keep challenging things, challenging assumptions. And that's how you're going to understand what is not known at the moment and what is just taken as what it is. You also need to know how to build trust. You need to build trust with your users and need to make sure they know that they can be vulnerable with you during this engagement. And so that brings us to the third tool in our toolkit, which is archetypes. Now, I would say, this is one of the most important tools, because UX designers, product designers, some of the biggest companies in the world all get it completely wrong. And so before we, talk about that, I'm just curious, has anybody done this creative types test by Adobe? It's kind of like a MBTI test, but for creatives. If you haven't, just go go check it out in Adobe's website, the mycreativetype.com, and it's a quick test. It's like very similar to your MBTI. And let me know in the chat if you've done it. What is your creative type? And once you have the results, essentially you're gonna feel like, is this result really me? Or maybe it's not really accurate, right? And especially when you've done your MBTI tests, I'm sure a lot of people have felt like, maybe 50% will feel one way, like, yeah, this is, pretty accurate. This is exactly who I am. And but the other 50% is like, no, I don't think this is very accurate. Maybe, this is not really me. And so I think this is a great segue to dive into what I'm really going to say about archetypes. So we know what personas are. This is an example of a persona. You have the name, you have the role of the user, you have personal details like, where does this person work? Are they single? Or what's their age? Where do they stay? And you even have things like their social media channels, apparently. And you have personality traits being mapped at a percentage of like, oh, this person is 70% empathetic, maybe. And, you have that whole progress bar thing. But this is exactly what's causing problems in your research and making you feel like it does not really affect what you're doing. Because I'm sure a lot of you have felt that, hey, I've created personas for my UX project that I'm doing, or any kind of design project that you're doing, but it didn't really help. It felt like a waste of time, and you felt like, what am I supposed to do with all this information? It never drove my design outcome. And so let me tell you one thing. Service designers do not use personas. We use archetypes. Very similar. It's like same but different. And so archetypes are essentially about understanding the different kinds of people you interact with and those that interact with your service. And so it's not about demographics, but it's about understanding their motivations, their fears, and their behaviors. And by understanding these, I do not mean putting them in a percentage um, progress bar and saying that, oh, this person is 90% motivated in their work. No, please don't do that. Think of archetypes as personas that you create, but with a deeper, more nuanced understanding of their emotional or psychological drivers. So in my work, I've typically found that, archetypes that are truly effective aren't just based on data points, but they emerge from observing real behaviors, listening to the real stories, and noticing patterns in how people actually approach their needs. And so that is actually how archetypes in the end classify common experiences or determinants that, personas are not able to. Personas essentially are demographic. I can just come and be like, hey, I'm Swapnil, I'm 27 years old, I'm a student. And it's very simple, you know. It's very easy to talk about things like their occupation, their age, and but when it comes to psychographics, you really ask deeper questions like, who am I in this place? It is that question that's going to give you a lot more data and insights that you will need to work with than the person's occupation or the person's tech literacy. For example, I know a lot of users that, a lot of designers that use tech literacy as a benchmark for, all low, medium, high tech literacy. And so I should, be careful about that. Yes, you have to be careful about that. But at the same time, that is very, very surface level and you have to go deeper. So I'm going to show an example of a persona project that was a project that was done by Engine, which is a service design consultancy. So this project was around pandemic, and we all know how crazy the COVID-19 pandemic was, right? And so what they've done is they've identified different archetypes to see how customers have changed during this pandemic, and that really can help then shape products that were made during the pandemic. So you have, for example, the hyper health aware, who is, very concerned about the risk of infection. They're like very diligently wearing masks, maybe even at home, and they want to ensure that them and their loved ones are safe. So they're going to be very, very intense about it. You have the life evaluator, where they're very humble people. And they maybe reprioritize their life during pandemic to become more mindful of how they spend their time, how they spend their money, who they spend their days with, and so they've started to find value in things they used to take granted for. The determined denier, right? This is the kind of person I'm sure we all know who's like, nah, who needs to wear face mask? Pandemic is a joke. It'll go back to normal very soon. It's not that bad, and they just continue to deny. And so, as you can see, there's nowhere in these archetypes that you saw that there was a mention of demographic information. You didn't see this is the age of the person, this is where they worked, this is how literate or tech literate they were. Because when you're designing products or during a time of a pandemic, these things are not going to help you. But these makers and these breakers and the descriptions of their archetypes that are psychographics essentially help a lot. These weren't just labels, they were living, breathing personas that were shaped by real stories, fears, and hopes. So using archetypes helps us design services that resonate on a human level. Instead of assuming what users want, we see the world through their eyes, understanding what keeps them awake at night, what excites you, and what barriers do you face, right? And this depth of insight allows us to then craft experiences that truly meet their needs and not just their profiles. So in this example, you can see how archetypes are constructed from very rich qualitative data, like such as stories, observations, and emotional cues, rather than just numbers who and they just help us move beyond that superficial segmentation and into the realm of a more genuine empathy. So now if we go back to the creative types test, you're going to see questions like these. And, I wonder if, did you find these questions difficult to answer? Because, through this, we really learned that, there's a reason why some people feel like their results aren't very accurate, while others feel like they are. And so essentially what you realize is that these are binary questions. You have to choose one or the other. And so essentially you're forced to conform to one choice that you have to make, even if you might feel like you're neither or you're in between. Humans are inherently very complex and contextual creatures, so we can't really just break ourselves into one or the other. And a lot of times we possess both, a bit of each, right? And verifying data is not something that us as designers we're supposed to do. That's for experimental physicists, right? We have a spectrum to work with, and that has an infinite number of points in between. And the more comfortable we are with the unknown, the better we can then design for the user. So in my project, I continue to create archetypes, and these are the ones that I created based on my primary and secondary research. I, I try to understand the attitude behind financial protection that different kinds of people have. I try to understand the needs and motivations of the different types of archetypes. I try to understand what their financial behavior is like. What do they prioritize? Do they like long-term solutions, short-term solutions? And so as you continue to do that, you kind of see, you know, that you can place these archetypes within a matrix. And so these are just two of the 6 archetypes that I had created, but I proceeded to then put them into a matrix to understand the complexities that exist and to make it easier to view these personas or archetypes and then understand who is it that I'm really designing for and is it really important to them. So you realize that archetypes can be deep, but if you categorize them in a matrix like such, you realize that actually we're only looking at maybe 1 or 2 uh, of the archetypes in one of the quadrants that is really the issue. And so we don't really need to engage or don't really need to, consider the other archetypes because that is not the issue. And it's, of course, very contextual to the project that you work on. And so essentially, the moral of the story when it comes to archetypes is that demographic information is a big no-no. It is not as important as you think. The most prominent text that you use should be to describe their mindset, their motivation, their values, and their real life experiences, not their names, not their age, not their occupation, not their whether they're single or not. That honestly has zero factor into your design project. And these personas essentially that you described, they're not mutually exclusive. You can have people that are made up of 2 different archetypes, and that's the beauty of it because nobody's just one person. You have people that overlap. And so whether it's you're trying to map the ecosystem or engage in real world conversations or trying to understand archetypes, these are 3 tools that are uncovering the unspoken, the invisible, and something that's deeply human in every single one of us. They remind us that at the heart of every service is a person who is complex, who is imperfect, and who is beautifully unpredictable. And that's the real power of service design. It's not about designing for people, and it's not for metrics at all. It's all about designing for that person, for the user, and for citizens and for people. And so it's about creating experiences that matter, experiences that change lives and not just improve your KPIs. So with that, I will that's pretty much all I have to say for today. And I hope you've taken, something out of it. I'm also, by the way, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to chat more about, service design, or if there is anything else you'd like to ask me or learn from me. And I'm also, looking for roles after my master's. So if you're hiring, let me know. And I think with that, I'll pass the time back to Steve.
Cool. Yep. Thanks a lot, Swap. Well, now it's a Q&A time, and just stay there for a while. Swap, just keep your screen sharing, and while I'm trying to read in the back end, we do have a bunch of questions coming in, so do not be surprised. I will just go by the most voted question from the top to the bottom, and but we have quite limited time, so we will try our best to answer all the questions as we can. The first question is coming from Reggie, and his question goes: do you have a go-to framework for mapping complex system, or does it all depends on context, such as depends on industry or depends on the nature of the systems? You're on mute, by the way.
Oh, sorry, Reggie or Reggie. That's a very good question. So I don't think there's a go-to framework when it comes to mapping complex systems. You're right when you to say that it depends on the context of the industry or the system that you're mapping. But essentially, what you need to understand is that there are different types of relationships that exist, and so you are using those as a base for, you know, mapping, understanding how you can then proceed to map this. For example, you're drawing arrows that represent, maybe funding flows, maybe influence flows, maybe authority flows, and so on. You're also using arrows or blockages on top of the arrows to represent, oh, this is a barrier that this person faces. You can use concentric circles where you have the one at the center being the most in power, or you can have concentric circles where the one center is the user, and the further away the stakeholders go, the lower the connection to the user, or the lower the influence they have on the user. And that helps you understand, is there someone who's very far away from the user that has a very little link with the user, but then that person actually has a very big impact on the user, and so there's clearly that mismatch there, right? And so that's how you could, there's no right way of mapping, or like a framework is essentially up to you and depending on the context. Yeah.
All right, cool. Our next question is from Courtney, and he says, given your background with Singapore Airlines long-term customer relationship, what does service blueprint mapping looks like when you are designing for customer who might engage with your service across multiple decades and even different stages in life?
Yeah, I think given how much Singapore Airlines values its service and service design, right? I think there are two aspects to it. One is for me, I touched on the digital aspect of the website and for the mobile and the desktop. But then you also have service designers who work on the physical aspect of the airlines that you experience when you fly with them, right? And so, at least for digitally, um, for a for a company that is so massive and has such complex legacy systems, it can be quite difficult because you are working with a lot of stakeholders that don't understand these concepts of like service blueprint mapping and so on. They have set instructions that have been given to them, and they rely on very straightforward logic rather than really caring for a user. And so, when you're doing service blueprint mapping for a big company like, for example, Singapore Airlines, you do engage, directly with the customers throughout your experience as a designer, and sometimes you don't. But then how it looks like is, I would say, it's a very messy way of understanding how you as a designer want to map it personally, and understanding how the company's priorities map change the service blueprint. And then when you see that, difference in your map and as a designer, and the company's, map that you've, after talking to all these product managers and stuff, you realize that yes, they're mismatched, and it becomes a problem about uh, engage maybe talking to these stakeholders and making sure that you bring your point across and make them think like a designer. Because the success of a designer in the first place is not to show your design and show that I solved the problem. It's to tell these people who are not designers to explain your design in a way that they become designers, right? They think in your perspectives and they agree with you. That is like one of the key aspects of how a designer actually succeeds. And so, you know, I would say it's a very messy relationship, messy thing when it comes to bigger companies. It's definitely a lot easier if you're in a smaller company or agency or working on a projects. And so I think, yeah, I would say that it's can get quite messy for bigger companies who have things that are already set in place. And so leverage your strengths, other strengths to actually make these people think as in designer and not as a product manager or as a developer. I think that's the biggest thing you can do.
I think one thing I can actually empathize a lot is I totally agree with you when you talked in the big organization, there's a lot of things flying around every day. So as a designer, sometimes you may feel like all the your effort has not been reaching to the right person on the right time on the right beat. But what I can also tell is keep trying and try to tell people that you're don't label people by you're the product designer. I'm a PO, or I'm a product manager, or I am representing the business, or I'm representing the dev. So try to think in their way. The way how we frame our question, the way how we frame our solution is very important to make people feel connected, and not just by
Yeah.
try to hard sell whatever decision you try to tell, and then to prove something.
Exactly. I think just to add to that as well, I understand your also the part of your question about, engaging with people who actually are engaging with your service for like multiple decades or different life stages. And I think, like I said, one of the key things to understand is that you're not then mapping them based on what life stage they are in or how long they've interacted with their service. That is, in a way, should become irrelevant because you're mapping their personalities. And a teenager can have this fall into the same archetype that you or persona that you design as someone who's on the older age with low technical background. And so what you're mapping are their personalities and their not their life stage that they're in or anything of that sort. I think that really helps you simplify it down to understand that map that you would have created, your blueprint that you would have created, and that will help you design then solutions that are more applicable for everyone.
Yep. Okay, we have maybe we have a bit of time for one more question, and this question is from Brian, and he's asking this: what's the difference between engagement and user interview? What sort of a preparation do you typically do to ensure the engagement which is successful?
Right. So what is the difference between engagement and user interview? I think user interviews, I would say, are a part of engagement, right?
Mhm.
They an engagement doesn't always have to be something very crazy, very exciting. It has to be something that's curated and purposeful. And if a user interview is something that you feel is going to get the most out of your engagement, then so be it. I think that's nothing. There's nothing absolutely wrong in that. I think for me, the kind of preparation I do before I ensure uh, an engagement is successful is to understand, firstly define what is it that I'm trying to understand from the engagement. You need to understand that you are first creating archetypes before you engage with them. So based on archetypes, you would have already had what are their makers and breakers and their personalities. From that, you're able to then curate your engagements for them. And so you then understand that pre-understand before your engagement that, oh, this is the way they think and this is the way they like to interact. Maybe this is how I should do it with them because that's what they will appreciate. How can I maybe get them to be more vulnerable with me, come out of their comfort zone and tell me their real experiences, rather than me always prompting or asking questions. And you want the other person to always do the more talking. So when you come out of an engagement and the person has done most of the talking, it's been a successful engagement, right? And so you always prepare for the archetype that you're doing and craft your engagement around them, rather than preparing like a standard template engagement, like, oh, you know, Swapnil did a game, I'm going to do the same card game, but then if let's say you do that engagement with people who are like the elderly on a completely different topic, it's not going to work. And so
Yeah.
knowing you need to be prepared in terms of your archetypes before you engage
Yes.
with them in the most effective way. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like MBTI. It's talking to introvert and talking to extroverts is definitely going to use different approaches. Okay,
Exactly.
cool. Yeah, we have lots of questions. Really, they just keep coming in. I think we're really running out of time. So don't worry. The question I will get Swap to get back to you after the session. Maybe you just reach out to you by email. I'm very happy to facilitate that process. But before we go, we have a few things. Okay. Whoever still stay in the chat is still in the session. Really, really thank you a lot for staying with us. And Swap, I want you to go and pick up a good question, or which question you think is the best question, and we're gonna pick that person as the lucky one for today.
All right. So I think a lot of you guys asked a lot of great questions, I would say, but I think the one that really stood out to me that I genuinely thought was a great question to ask, given that it's a very, very fair question. I think Courtney did a pretty great job on asking me. I loved how it's not just you asking about how does the blueprint map look like, but it's very fair to assume that you're engaging with a service with customers who engage with it across life stages and multiple decades. And I think that's a very, very good question and insight that you have brought forward as well. Thanks, Courtney.
Cool, yeah, Courtney. So do make sure you stayed till the end of the session. We'll try to reach out to you, and I will send you the gift card code for redemption. So you can use the $50 USD in the Figma store, and the shipping is also included from there. So feel free to go and order some Figma swags there. Cool. Okay, so Swap, I'm gonna take him back to screen sharing, and
Yep.
coming up in Singapore. Singapore chapter is we are going to end here, but coming up next in Friends of Figma, we'll be switching over to Friends of Figma Hanoi. Okay, let me just take over the screen share here. Cool. Okay. Okay, so coming up will be Friends with Figma Hanoi. I'm not sure if we have any Vietnamese audience in here, but just bear in mind, the session is going to be in Vietnamese. But don't worry, if you're speaking English, we do have a concurrent session happening by Friends of Figma Hong Kong, and it's happening in the next 10 minutes. So do make sure you drop into fof-worldtour.com to secure a spot if you're joining for the upcoming session happening in next 10 minutes. Okay, and Hong Kong, yes, they're going to talk about design system. It's something I can talk day and night. I wish I could join then as well. But don't worry, there's plenty of opportunity. There's a lot of events happening from Friends of Figma, the chapters around the whole world. So do keep an eye open for that as well. So with that being said, we have one more request from you guys. We have a little QR code here. We love your feedback. Anything that you feel we can improve for the next year, do feel free to let us know. This is our first time organizing the World Tour event, so I'm pretty sure there's a lot of things we can improve. So do let us know how do you feel about the event, and we are going to listen to any feedback you can drop us there. Okay, so with that being said, nothing great is being made alone. So we want to extend our thanks to all the chapters around the whole world. Singapore is just being the small red across the whole community, and there's a lot of communities out there. So do feel free to join. Whichever city you are in, reach out to them, and I'm pretty sure they will be very friendly to welcome you to the community. So that being said, we thank you so much to tune in to the Friends of Figma World Tour. It's happening 24 hours. And we thank you for tuning into this specific session. I will see you in the next session. Thank you, Swap.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Steve.
All right, bye-bye.